lesson for us as well. We are, as always, we can hope that the learning of the Zera Shimshon continues to provide us with Yeshuot in every way, shape, or form, and we hope that each of us, in our own way, continues to see Yeshuot because b'zchut, the learning of b'zchut the tzaddik, the Zera Shimshon. So, in this week's Parsha, in order to introduce the Drush, the first one of Parshat Nasso, we have to take a step back, one parak, parak Daled, which continues. The beginning of Parshat Nasso starts in Pasuk Kaf Alef of parak Daled, the fourth parak of Bamidbar. But we're going to start actually in parak Daled Pasuk Alef, which is in the beginning, at the end of Parshat Bamidbar. The end of Parshat Bamidbar already starts with the words Nasso et Rosh Bnei Kahat mitoch Bnei Levi, right? So Hashem tells Moshe and Aaron to, in this case, Nasso means to count them or to lift them up, depending on how you read Nasso. And it says Bnei Kahat, it says mitoch et Rosh Bnei Kahat mitoch Bnei Levi, and it says the Mishpachotam Levet Avotam. That's Pasuk Bet, and Pasuk Gimel says Mi ben 30 shana v'mala va'ad ben 50 shana. So he says, it says that the person from the age of 30 up to the age of 50, the Bnei Kahat are responsible for serving in the Mishkan. And it says Kol Ba, everyone, all that come to Latzava. In this case, we usually say Latzava means to be part of the army of Hashem or something like that. We're going to see a different parish later. And then it continues with the idea of what Bnei Kahat's responsibility is. We know that their responsibility is comprised of, in the Mishkan, of carrying the Mishkan, is their responsibility is the Aron, the Ark, the Menorah, and the Shulchan. Parshat Nasso starts with, and then at the end of that last week's Parsha, Hashem tells Bnei Israel to make sure to keep Bnei Kahat focused on their avoda, so that way they don't disrespect or disregard their action, because they knowing that their responsibility is quite high. Touching the Aron, we know, inappropriately or doing things with it, disrespecting it, will lead to punishment. So Moshe tells Bnei Israel to be extra careful with Bnei Gad, encouraging them and to strengthen them. Now, when we look at Pasuk Kaf Bet, it says, Nasso et Rosh Bnei Gershon Gam Hem Levet Avotam Lebishpechotam. That's the beginning of this week's Parsha. And it says, Hashem tells Moshe to count Bnei Gershon, them too. Right? Gam Hem, them too. And it says, now the Zera Shimshon Drush Alef of Parshat Nasso starts with, Kan, in this week's Parsha, in Pasuk Kaf Gimel, it says, Mi ben 30 shana v'mala, ad 50 shana, just like it said last time, Tivkot Otam, count them, Kol Haba, right? Not all that come. It says everyone who comes. Kol haba is changed. It's a different explanation. And he says litzvot tzava la'avod avoda be'ol moed. So Parshat Mishpachat Gershon, the Gershon family, is told litzvot tzava and la'avod avoda. Unlike, now he's going to say ula'el the Bnei Kahat. When we look in el, it means to look back. Look up, meaning look in the earlier Parsha. It says, like I said, pointed out, it says Bnei Kahat. It says Kol Ba, everyone who comes, not anyone who comes. Anyone comes. Latzava lasot melacha. It says Latzava lasot melacha, not lavod avoda. And then he says, V'tzarich beur. We also need an explanation. Lama bivnei Gershon katuv litzvot tzava ubivnei Kahat latzava bilvad. If we look in Bnei Kahat, it says Latzava. In Gershon, it says litzvot tzava, and in Bnei Merari, u'ketiv kan kol haba le'el kol ba. Like I said, the words kol haba and kol ba, and chan ketiv la'avod avoda le'el lasot melacha. So he says that every one of the mishpachot, every one of the families, the three families of the Leviim, have a different description of what their responsibility is. Here, Bnei Kahat, in the end of Parshat Bamidbar, it says Kol ba latzava lasot melacha. In this week's parsha, Bnei Gershon are told Kol haba litzvot tzava la'avod avoda, and then we have Bnei Merari. It says Kol haba latzava la'avod et avodat ol moed. So every one of them has a different description of what their responsibilities are, or a different description of how their avoda is, or is meant to be. And it's clear that the Zera Shimshon is a bit perplexed, is unsure of what is going on here, and he's trying to figure out why the differences are. In fact, that this question is pretty standard across most of the primary mefarshim that offer various tshuvot as to why they're different, what the differences are. And he says, and Zera Shimshon continues, right? He follows the model of Bnei Gershon. So he says there's some sort of combination, Bnei Merari, unlike Bnei Gershon and Bnei Kahat, there's some sort of other combination that happens, and he wants to figure out, and he's going to ask the question as to what's going on. So the Zera Shimshon, in order to explain this situation, explain the differences between the three different Mishpachot Levi, we have to understand, he says that in order to do that, we say, V'ita b'Bereshit Rabbah, al pasuk v'aychul hashamayim. If you look in Bereshit Rabbah, the Midrash on v'aychul hashamayim, it says the Matnot Kahuna there is mentioned, and the Matnot Kahuna there mentions the idea that there are three different kinds. It says v'aychul hashamayim ba'aretz v'chol tziva'am. Tziva'am there, they're hosts, right? There we say it's their hosts, not necessarily their armies. And there, in the Matnot Kahuna, there v'chol tziva'am means it means some sort of multitude. Right, it means a multitude of hosts and of chol tziva'im. Chol tziva'im means their whole group, their whole massive group. And in this, that means the chol tziva'im there, it means that the whole earthly, the whole worldly, the whole sky, the whole clouds, the sun, the moon, everything that's going by Chol Shemayim Ba'aretz, everything, the Chol Tziva'im, and everything that's part of that. But here, he quotes, the Zera Shimshon is quoting a Rashi that's mentioned in the Midrash, and he says there, Shloshat Tzva'im Heim. There are three different kinds of, the word Tzava the word Tzava, not Tzava, the word Tzava means three different things. Tzava l'Shamayim Ba'aretz, Tzava l'Talmidim, v'Tzava l'Yisurim. He says, there's a tzava for heaven and earth, meaning too, like we said, meaning it's like this massive thing. Tzava for disciples, meaning for students, and tzava for afflictions, for yisurim. And Rashi explains, unlike what the Midrash says, that there are three different kinds of tzava, three multitudes. Right? You can have a multitude of heaven and earth, a multitude of tzava of students. And the tzava, a multitude chas v'chalila, we can have a multitude of afflictions. Rashi mentions that the tzava, or tzava, means lashon chefetz. Tzava is actually an expression of want, meaning chefetz, I want something, I desire something, ratzon, and tava, I have a longing for it. Right? And the Aramaic, based on the Aramaic word, that's in Iyov, it says Kol Yemei Tzva'i Ayachel. Right? All throughout the days of my life, in Iyov, he says that all the days of my life, I long, I desire for life. So Rashi, and Zera Shimshon is going to use this focus, the word Tzva, to explain some sort of desire, want, desire, want, longing as his main parish for what's going on here. Since, based on the idea that the Zera Shimshon is quoting, like we said, from this Rashi, that he says that tzva means desire, we can suggest that the Torah is saying when it says litzvot tzava, or we could suggest that anytime the word, in this case, for sure, we could say that it mentions the word litzvot tzava, it means some sort of desire, so level of desire. And each one of them, each time, and then once we understand that this means we're using the word tzva to mean desire or interest or yearning, then we can reinterpret the entire conversation and the three differences between the three different families. So he says, litzvot tzava, like we said, the double expression litzvot tzava would mean different degrees of that each family approaches, and now we're going to get to the point where now we understand. Once that is the base of where we're starting, now he's going to start plugging in where litzvot tzava comes into and how it applies to each one of the families the three different families of Levi. And actually an interesting component that is not mentioned in the Zera Shimshon will be mentioned as well. So we mentioned, so Shloshat Tzvaim Heim Lashon Chefetz Ratzon V'Tava. Va'od b'Midrash Rabbah. Again, we're doing the Drush 1 of Parshat Nasso. The Midrash Rabbah also says, Al Tachritu et Shevet Mishpechot Kati. The Midrash also says, as we said in last week's Parsha, that we should not let the tribe of the family of Kehat, right, be cut off. What does that mean? Because we know that touching the Aron or touching the Klei Mikdash outside of the context of carrying it or doing it in disrespectful manner, the death penalty is karet. And so Bnei Israel are told not to protect them, meaning to protect, make sure that they don't get punished for what they're doing, because it's a zchut to do it. It's a zchut to carry the Aron, it's a zchut to carry the Klei Mikdash, but it has to be a zchut in the proper context. If they do it disrespectfully or they disrespect their role, then obviously they're going to get punished. So Hashem says to them, please be careful and make sure that they stay focused. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman omer, afal pisha Aron haya mechaleh behem, hayu notim nafsham al Aron. Right, so Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman says in the Midrash there, in Bamidbar Rabbah, he says that even though the Aron would destroy those who stay, disrespectfully, the family of the family of God still focused, said, we want to do it. We understand the ramifications of disrespecting it, but we're still taking responsibility. However, V'lama mazhir aleim al tachritim. Then the question, if Bnei Kahat are really so focused and locked in to keep the avoda, keep their responsibility serious, take their responsibility seriously. The question is, why then do we have this whole issue, right? Then why does Hashem have to cut them off, right? If we know that Bnei Kahat are taking, I'm not sure what word I said there, but. If we understand that each of the families are doing Drush Alef in Parshat Bamidbar, the question that arose in the beginning is, excuse me, I'm sorry. Sefer Bamidbar, Parshat Bar Nasso, the first one. If you look at the end of Parshat Bamidbar, when Hashem tells tells Moshe to count Bnei Kahat, we know their responsibility is to carry the Aron, the Shulchan, and the Mizbeach, and in those psukim at the beginning of Perek Dal, at the end of Parshat Bamidbar, it says, "Miben 30 shana v'amala v'ad ben 50 shana kol bal hatzava la'asot melacha b'ol moed." That's how it describes Bnei Kahat. Then in this week's parsha, when it says Bnei Gershon Gam Heim, it says kol haba litzvot tzava la'avod avodah. Right? That's Mishpachat Gershon. And then when you look at Bnei Merari, it says Kol haba latzava la'avod et avodat ol moed. So each one of them has their own description of what their job is, and each one of them has their own combination of tzava, haba, litzvot tzava, la'avod avodah. And so the Zera Shimshon is bothered by each one of these combinations. And in order to start his answer and introduce his explanation, the first thing that he said, he quoted a Rashi based in a Midrash that says that tzava, we usually say tzava means like some sort of massive, it's an army. Today we use it as an army, but it means a massive number of people. But right? Tzvaam there doesn't mean multitude, right? So that's what we usually, these are chalavi for anyone who's concerned, making sure though not to be machshil anyone. But so usually we just find tzva as multitude. Interestingly, and although I'm not going to start getting into politics, as I usually try not to, but in this case, Rashi in the Midrash, Rashi says that tzva means desire, longing, and passion. It says here, tzva means lashon chefetz, ratzon, v'ta'ava. That's what lashon tzva.
And it's a tzvi. What?
Yeah.
Tzva is the host.
Usually we describe and translate tzva as multitude, some sort of massive group of things, whatever the group. Right. So but here Rashi, again, this is Rashi. Who am I to argue with Rashi? Rashi says that tzva means based on a based on a pasuk in Iyov. Yeah, it's also Aramaic. Tzva means ratzon. It means some sort of desire, and he says it means a desire. It means a longing, a yearning. And he's going to take, based on that, the Zera Shimshon is going to now do is plug in the word tzva meaning ratzon or chefetz or desire, he's going to describe that each one of the mishpachot has a different level of desire in their avoda.
What was the original question?
The original question is, why does each one of the mishpachot have a different description of tzava, kol haba, kol ba, lasot melacha, lavod avoda, inconsistent, right? Even though there are three families that are meant to be doing the same role, meaning within mishpachot Leviah. And then he quotes, and now this is where we're up to. He says, the Midrash Rabbah says that the Bnei Kahat, we know last week's Parshat, Hashem tells Bnei Yisrael, make sure to keep the Bnei Kahat locked in, so that we don't kill them. Because what's going to happen is, God forbid, if they see the Kodesh or they disrespect the Kodesh, they're going to get kareh. So Hashem tells them, make sure that we keep them focused. Right? Kabalat Kodesh Vametu. Exactly. So the question is, Lama Mazir Alehem Al Tachritu. Right? Why does Hashem warn them not to cause them to have kareh? Right? Meaning, what type of disrespect would this apply to if Kahat were careful? Meaning, the Midrash there quotes a Rav Shmuel Bar Nachman, who says Bnei Kahat understood their role and said, we understand what's going to happen if we don't do it respectfully. If we disrespect it, and we're going to still take it on. So if they knew that already, so then why would you tell them? Make sure not to cause them kareh. Like in other words, you can't have it both ways. Either, right. So now he's going to explain, and he says, about 2 paragraphs in, on Kuf Pei Hey, and I'll tell you exactly where we're right.
Top of the page.
Second paragraph. Second paragraph in the blue svarim there, and it says that they knew that is what happened is, in the order of preference or in the order of reward, the reward for carrying the shulchan, carrying the aron is the highest. We know that from the sefer with sefer Melachim with David, right? He gets killed. But what happens with the person who does get the aron in his house? He gets rich. He gets very wealthy. That's just one example. But the reward for carrying the aron versus the shulchan and the mizbech is much greater. The aron is much higher. So what would happen is, they say they would get. We know, I would hedge my bets. What's the highest reward? Carry the aron. What's the lowest reward? Shulchan and mizbech. So they would run to carry the aron because they know that the money is great, even though its responsibility is high, right? So that's what he's saying here. V'chulan ratzin al aron lo tol schar, mitoch kach hayu merivin, mitoch shayu nuagim b'kalut rosh, hayta shechina pogat bam. What would happen is, if I know that the reward is highest with the aron, so I'm going to run to get the aron first. And what's going to happen is, I'm going to run and try to beat out my friend, like it says in the Mishnah Yom Yoma.
They used to race up.
Right, they race up right on his back. So here, right. So break their arm. So here it's the same thing. They would run, and because out of Kalud Rosh, meaning they were so focused on beating their friend out to get the thing, that they would have Kalud Rosh, and then they would get punished. Right? That's why we have some sort of takana in Pasuk Yutet at the end of Parshat Bamidbar. We see what is the takana, what's the rules in place and the guide in place in order to put them to make sure that Bnei Kahat stay focused. Now, what do we learn from this? Mikan nir'eh shebnei Kahat lo hayu olchim al dat lifrok et hamishkan kulo shezeh nikra avodah dahainu ha'avodah she'ayta tzricha b'mishkan. We can learn from this that the Kahat did not approach their assignment, their role, with the proper intent. In other words, I know that my role is to dismantle the Mishkan, but in order to do that, right, they were focused so focused on the Aron that they didn't, right. Instead of and they approached their task as any avodah. That's considered avodah, right? That was the avodah that means the full job. The full job is to take each one of the kelim, dismantle it from the Mishkan, meaning take it out of the Mishkan, wrap it properly in the tchelet cloth, right? That would be the what would they do? They say is, we know that our job is to dismantle the Mishkan. Dismantling the kelim. So our job is to dismantle the kelim. But if I know that the dismantling, taking the aron is the one that receives the biggest reward. So what am I going to do? I'm going to run for the aron, and the other two I'm going to put aside. I'm going to zip past that one and run to the aron. So it's what he's saying is that they had less interest to complete the task. They didn't do the avodah completely. Their avodah was not, their full avodah would be take all the kelim. But since they were so focused on the aron, their entire avodah was incomplete. And now, if we look, now he sees, look what it says in the psukim of last week's parsha. Now he says, "Umishum hachi katuv la'asot melacha by bnei kahat." That's why it says la'asot melacha. They wanted to do a job, but not to complete the role. They didn't want to complete the task. They wanted to do their job, right? That's why it says.
Melacha versus avodah.
Exactly. Melacha is I'm doing part of the task, a task, versus avodah, which is the entire role or task, right? Shemelachat achat bilvad hayu osim. Their desire, their interest was get the aron, reach the aron, finish the aron, but their job was not velo avodah, and they didn't complete the job, right? The old Quran melacha, and they called it a melacha. They called it a burden, a task. Right? If I have a task, what do I approach? I have a task on my list. I have to get it done. But if it was an avodah, if it was something that I really viewed as an avodah, what would I view it as? A real avodah. I'd get like uplifted by it. I'd be interested in doing it. And that's why he says.
When you talk about avodah and melacha, you got lametet avot melacha for Shabbat. So it's like tasks.
Yeah, it's things that we can't do or can do.
Yeah.
Right.
And
but,
then avodat Hashem.
Right. Right, but unlike right, melechet machshevet, melacha means you need to have some sort of focus on it to do it, to get it done, but it's not considered an avodah. And so that's why we have davening is an avodah shebalev, right? And that's why when we serve Hashem, we're doing the avodah to Hashem. It's not like a melacha. It's not a thing checklist, right? So now he says, kach hayu shekshem shemisho osem melacha ino osa otel el kedei l'arviach, kach hayu ratzim kulam et ha'aron el ha'aron kedei litol sachar. So he said, just like a malacha, a task that I have, if I know the task is going to make me money, I'm going to do the job, I'm going to get paid, I'm going to get it done quickly. So he says, the Zera Shimshon is understanding that the kahat was approaching their entire job as a task. Their job was not an avodah, because if it was an avodah, they would really have an interest. And the words, he's saying, but you pick up in the words, when you look at the words malacha versus avodah, the malacha itself, the first time it mentions their job is, so their level of ratzon, is the least. It's diminished. Now look, it says and since the task, that is the one task that they had, the Bnei Kahat wanted to perform, carrying the aron, since all of them couldn't, right, by default, you only have 4 people who could carry, let's say even 6 people who could carry it, right? So not everyone can reach it. So look what it says. That's why it says kol ba, without the letter hey. The pasuk indicates that anyone who arrives first, right, first come, first serve, right? Anyone comes, right? Kol ba, while the other ones, right? Kol haba, right? So now you're going to get to understand the difference in a second. And mishalo zachaba, any one of those bnei kahat that didn't get to merit to carry the aron, right? Lo ayaratz l'shulchan hamenorah kol kach b'irtzon libo, right? He wouldn't run as quickly to reach the Shulchan Menorah. And that's why it doesn't say the word of litzvot tzava, the desire. Right? They didn't run. They didn't have that. They didn't have that the cheshek as much as we had at the other Bnei Levi. Now he's going to put that into a second. Right? They were locked in on carrying one object, which is the aron. Right, so now we understand that the reasoning behind Bnei Kahat's, the words themselves, according to the Zera Shimshon, indicate Kahat, even though, yes, they understood the ramifications of their role, which is that if they lose focus, the karet they might be punishable with karet. It's clear that they were doing their entire job as a malacha and not as avodah. And that's why in the first time it's mentioned of what their role is within this within this taking apart and dismantling of the Mishkan, their job is viewed as malacha, and it's also mentioned as kol bala malacha. Kol bala malacha, excuse me. Pasuk. It says, now if we look at the words, now you plug it back in, it makes sense. It says, kol bala tzava lasot malacha. Right? It doesn't say litzvo, it doesn't say litzvo tzava, and it doesn't say la'avod avodah. They view it as a malacha. Now we have to understand. Now we got to now exactly. And now one of the things, interestingly enough, which is not mentioned in the Zera Shimshon, but on Tuesday night when I was doing with my LKovod Erev, I've said, now we can understand where if we look later on in this lovely sefer of Sefer Bamidbar, who is from Bnei Kahat, Korach.
Koach.
Korach is from Bnei Kahat. Bnei Kahat, we learn from the Bitim. What do we know about education? Education comes from home. Where is Bnei Kahat? Bnei Kahat is the child of Levi, right? Bnei Kahat is then you have Ben Yitzhar, Ben Kahat, right? You have Yitzhar as the son, and then you have Korach as the grandson of Kahat, right? Now, what do we know about the Malacha? Their approach to everything was, it's not so important, right? When parents have to model for their kids. If the parents don't model for their kids what you want their kids to what you want the desired outcome, the kid is going to do the same thing. So when the parents say we view this as a task, we view this as just a burden, and if I can't do the whole thing and I view it as a burden, it's just something off the checklist. Guess what's going to happen with Korach? Korach is going to say, hey, I can get a better job. Hey, maybe I could get a better role. I can squeeze my position in. Because Korach is learning from the person above him, from his grandfather who said, hey, it's just a task. When I go into, right, how do we approach our avoda? Do we approach our avoda with, it's a burden? Or do we approach our avoda with avoda, and therefore people are going to see the passion and see something out of it? And now, based on that, now it says, Umi Shalo. Okay, so now he says, Vnei Gershon, Sha'af Heim Hayu Nosim Dvarim Yoter Kedoshim Bnei Merari. Right? If we look, Bnei Gershon, we says in this week's parsha, it says they were also carrying, just like Kahat, were carrying things that were certainly, let's call it more. I don't want to say on a higher level of kedusha because the entire Mishkan was higher, but according to the Kli Yakar, not the Kli Yakar that we know, but a different Kli Yakar that was written before the one that we are familiar with, it says that the role of Merari, what's the role of Merari? To carry the krashim, to carry the adanim, right? All the amudim, all these things. And since that is what completes the Mishkan, meaning that's what makes it the structure that is the Mishkan, so according to the Kli Yakar, he says that is their role of importance is on level 2. Meaning Kahat is number 1 because they carry the Aron, the Mishkan, the Aron, the Menorah, and the Shulchan. Level 2 is Merari because they carry the Amudim and everything that completes the structure. So they're on level 2. And now he says, "Kamosha Metzinu Shegam Heim Nosim Arov Bakatev." We look at, we find that Gershon, just like Kahat carry most of their stuff on their katef, on their shoulders, because out of respect for the kedusha of the kelim. And now he says, we look at Gershon. Gershon was also carrying most, even though they had 2 carts, most of their work was on the shoulders. Most of their responsibility was carrying things on their shoulders. Shari Moshe lo natan el she'aglot. According to Gemara in Sota, it says that the Gemara in Sota says that Moshe gave them 2. They understood that the weight of the krashim and amudim was too much, so they gave him 2 wagons. But most, if not all, of their work was done on their shoulders. So it says, "Livnei Merari natan ari," but Merari, right? So Merari is the lowest level. So Merari gets 4 because they have other things that are obviously either heavier or less logistically possible or I guess viable to carry only on shoulders. And that's why it says the word gam haim, them as well, meaning that Gershon had a similar in sense to that of Kahat. They were also relatively prominent, meaning if in order of prominence it goes Kahat, Gershon, Merari. Kahat was the highest because obviously they were the ones that carried the most important kelim. Then Gershon, and that's based on the word gam haim, them too, right? And now we can explain. It says umasam shel bnei Gershon haya kula shaveh. Right now, if we look at the sons of Gershon, the bnei Gershon, what do we know about? Everything they carried was of equal importance. Right? They didn't have, this keresh or this amud or this vav is more important, less important. Everything has equal significance. Right? Nothing on their role had more significance or less significance. And therefore, like we know with what we said before, Bnei Kahat, they had the Aron. The Aron was viewed as the most important and the one that would provide them with wealth and sustenance, meaning the person who carries it. So therefore, everything in the role of Gershon was considered equally significant, and therefore it says, and there was no one fighting or vying for the one kli over another kli to carry it. So it says, Lachen amar kol haba litzvot tzava kulam baratzon shaveh lavod avodah hainu kol avodah. Their job, their level of interest, their level of desire to do their entire avodah, unlike Bnei Kahat who said, we're viewing it as a malacha. Here, everyone had litzvot tzava, means to desire. They had a real yearning to do the complete avoda. And since then, since the Gershonim even though they had a task, since they had a task that was just as, or almost as prominent as Bnei Kehat, right? It says the terms Kol Haba means anyone who comes, right? Anyone who came, whether they were early or late, they had a task that was desirable, a task that they were interested in. And since all of their tasks were equally prominent, the double expression of Litzvot Tzava indicates that they also had a great desire to do it. And so finally the term Avoda is also appropriate since they came with the desire to complete their entire task and not just for the sake of reward. Meaning they didn't look at it as, oh, I got to get it done, so therefore I'm viewing it as a melacha. Rather, they had their avoda was a level of avoda that was higher, since they had a strong desire to complete the task, complete the job, and their intention with doing the job was at a very high level. And now we have the third one, which is Bnei Merari. When you look at the Bnei Merari, the sons of Merari had the task that was, let's call it, on level 3. Right, and since most of their work was done with wagons and not on their shoulders, enomer litzvot tzava. Right, the Torah does not say litzvot tzava of double expression of desire, because their level of desire is going to be lower because they don't have to do it. Right, because their desire was to complete the task was lacking because the status was lower. Right, they see that we're in relation to Kahat or Gershon, Merari is on the lowest level. But nevertheless, even though they realized that maybe we're on tier 3 in terms of the level of desire, they still wanted to do it. And therefore, lachen k'tiv haba, that's why the word haba, anyone who comes, right, it's teaching us that anyone who came had an equal task. La'avod et avodat is to teach us that avodah implies that the entire job. And a job that is not done for some other ulterior motive, like what we said with Kehat. And it doesn't say kolba, which implies that some people had a more desirable task, like the aron, and less desirable task. Meaning that while Kehat desire was limited to only one aspect of the job, which is to carry the aron, the Bnei Merari had performed all of their tasks with equal desire, equal ratzon, and that's why it says litzvo kol haba litzvo. It says here Bnei Merari. Kol haba latzava, anyone who comes la'avod et avodat omer, means anyone who comes to their tzava, anyone who comes, they will have equal importance. Latzava, meaning to the desire. La'avod, meaning they would complete the task. So each one, now we can understand that each one of the Bnei Levi that comes in, that had a responsibility to carry and to do part of the dismantling and carrying of the Mishkan, each one of them, the words implies and the words teach us something about their level of desire and and like I said, it may even teach us something about how their children and grandchildren approached not only the melacha in the Mishkan, but also approached their avoda in general. Maybe avoda Hashem, as I proven through Koach, you can see that Koach himself was challenging the overall role, because he said, if I don't have respect for my entire role and I view it as a task, then I can disrespect or I can challenge the overall order of things in a way that may not necessarily be the right way to do it. And therefore, what happens? What do we know about Koach? He gets burned, right? A person who messes up with the avoda or doesn't do the avoda with full passion is going to burn him down and burn him down. It doesn't mention that the Zera Shimshon does not mention that, but I added that point because it does definitely teach us something about how we should approach avoda in general, how we should approach the mitzvot and avodah Hashem in general, but also more importantly is teaching us that each one of the words that describes the Bnei Levi also teaches us about how their approach was overall and their desire to complete the melacha. Pause here for a few seconds.
Right.
Sakkal?
Yeah.
Okay.